The stakes were high ahead of the final match day of the Euro 2004 group stage. 3 teams could advance from Group C, but none was assured of it. The teams in question were Sweden, Denmark and Italy. Because of UEFA's head-to-head tiebreaker criteria, a 2-2 draw or more between Sweden and Denmark would secure advancement for both of them, even if Italy managed to win their match against Bulgaria with double digits. The Scandinavians ultimately did draw 2-2, sparking match-fixing allegations from many Italians. If you look at the last few minutes of the match between Denmark and Sweden, it's easy to see why the Italians were so infuriated. The Scandinavians are just passing the ball around to run out the clock, since it's a result that favors them both. However, this was only the case after the score became 2-2. For the opening 88 minutes of the match, it's obvious that it's just 2 teams who are going for the win. Nevertheless, it has later emerged that some of the players in the match have said seemingly incriminating things. During the warm-up, Sweden's Erik Edman asked Daniel Jensen if they should go for the 2-2, to which the Dane replied, yes, why not? Then Edman said, okay, you concede first. There were things said during the game too. Anders Andersson said, come on, bloody hell, give us a break now, to the Danish Thomas Gravesen when the Swedes were losing 2-1. Gravesen replied, yes, but then you have to at least go forward. This is not as incriminating as it might seem to some. Arguably not whatsoever, and I'll explain why. It's obvious that these are tongue-in-cheek statements, jokes not meant to be taken seriously, as are very common between players in football matches. Or in any team sport for that matter. If you've ever played a team sport, you'll know what I'm talking about. I'll even use a personal example. A few months ago, I played in an amateur floorball tournament with some of my university classmates. We were losing by 10 goals or something, so one of our players asked, come on, can't you at least let us score once? To which an opponent replied, okay, but come forward then. On top of being eerily similar to what Gravesen told Andersson in 2004, it's very clearly a joke. The stakes are obviously much higher in the European Football Championship than in an amateur floorball tournament, but the same logic is still applicable. Another thing that proves these statements should be taken with a grain of salt is that Sweden conceded first, even though Edman told Jensen that Denmark should do so. Again, a clear sign they were joking. The same can be said about fans who appeared to advocate for a 2-2 draw. It's banter in the proper sense of the word, and pretending like you think they're serious or influence the players into match fixing is just disingenuous. And ironically enough, one of the main reasons they were even talking about it to begin with may have been because it was discussed so heavily by Italians and their media ahead of the match during press conferences and so on. Had it not been for that, Denmark and Sweden may not have even considered the extremely specific scenario which would see them both advance at Italy's expense. There's also the question of motive. Had Denmark won 2-1, they would have topped the group and eliminated their biggest arch rivals, Sweden. Intentionally conceding a goal would make Sweden top the group ahead of them and force the Danes to face the best side of the tournament so far in the quarterfinals, the Czech Republic. Would they seriously do that just to avoid potentially having to face this underperforming Italian side later in the tournament? It just doesn't make any sense and seems very far-fetched. What makes it even more unreasonable is that Italy were never even in a position to advance to the quarterfinals throughout the final match day. It's only with the power of hindsight that we know a Danish victory would have assured Italy's advancement, following their last-minute goal against Bulgaria, which made the Italians win. A 1-1 draw between Sweden and Denmark would have also seen them advance at Italy's expense. Throughout the match, it's obvious that Denmark and Sweden are both doing what's in their own separate best interests. Italy being eliminated is just a byproduct, and not the result of collusion or match fixing. Earlier I mentioned how Italy were never in a position to advance throughout the final match day. But let's give them the benefit of the doubt and assume the Scandinavians always knew Italy would beat Bulgaria. In that case, Denmark needs to score when the game is tied at 0-0, so they do. Now Sweden needs to score to advance, so they do. At 1-1, Denmark and Sweden would have both advanced regardless, with the power of hindsight. But let's take it a step farther and take for granted that the Scandinavians assumed Italy would beat Bulgaria by at least 2 goals. In that case, Denmark would now need to make it 2-1 to advance, which they did. Would Sweden intentionally concede that goal, risk elimination, miss out on the chance to knock out their biggest arch-rivals Denmark, and assume Denmark would intentionally let them make it 2-2, just to avoid having to potentially face this underperforming Italian side later in the tournament? Again, it just doesn't make any sense. When Denmark led 2-1, Sweden needed to score to advance, so they did. Italy being eliminated is never part of the equation. Denmark and Sweden are merely doing what's in their own individual best interests. After the match is tied at 2-2 and they just pass the ball around, it's certainly a bad look, but not match fixing or collusion to eliminate Italy. Denmark and Sweden are merely doing what's in their own separate best interests for the last 3 minutes or so of the match. But that was just done opportunistically, not premeditated. And Italy only have themselves to blame for even being in a position where collusion would risk eliminating them. They can only blame themselves for not defeating Denmark and Sweden to avoid this potential scenario. But as I said, it was not match fixing or collusion.